Good day, everyone. Welcome to this session of Android development, and today we'll look at something called view binding. So ever since we started this journey of developing apps in the Android environment, we've been using find view by ID when we want to refer to our controls on the screen. Now, granted, our samples have been short so far, so it isn't really much of a bother to have few lines of code to connect to the individual pieces of the screen, but it does get tedious. And for the longest time, Android developers have wanted to find a more efficient way to do it. With the introduction of the later Android SDKs, the concept of view binding was introduced, and basically what happens in view binding is instead of using find view by ID, we or Android Studio creates a secondary file from the XML that lists down all of the controls in it, and you can use that file to refer directly to those controls. So that's what we'll look at here, and we'll start off with a blank project. So if you haven't done it yet, please create a new blank project similar to what I have here. And the first thing we'll do is arrange our user interface. So I'll just push the Project Explorer to the side so we have more space here, and we want code here. So I'll split this, and always remember split allows you to see both your XML code and the WYSIWYG interface for designing your UI. And normally I do this when I'm playing around with the code and I want to immediately see the results for that. So as you can see from Android Studio behind me. Now, this isn't a typing class, so please make sure that you go to the links provided to download the code and copy and paste it like what I'll be doing now. So I want to so I prepared the interface beforehand, so you guys don't have to type it all in again. I'll just copy and paste this. So I'm so like I said, I don't want you guys to type everything in. Make sure you have a copy of the files I shared, and I'll copy from that I'll copy the code from that file and just delete all of this code and replace it with the code that we'll be using. So you'll see now the user interface is simple enough. But to achieve this layout, there's a couple of tricks that we have here. One, we're not using our normal constraint layout, since what you see here are a bunch of controls that are aligned one after the other. So you have an edit text, then an edit text, a button, and another button. And they are all in a line. So we can do this quickly with a constraint layout, but the constraint layout isn't the only one available to us. We have a linear layout, and the linear layout literally aligns your controls one after the other in a linear format. So you can do it vertically, like what we see here, or it can do it horizontally. So with a linear layout, each control occupies only one row, as we can see right now on the screen. So we have a big linear layout. That's for the entire screen, and that follows the rule for creating screens that there is in the hierarchy of controls one big layout. Then after that linear layout, we actually have two more linear layouts inside. The first one is this. So that contains the two edit text boxes and then the button here for add data. And then we have another linear layout that contains actually two controls. Well, actually one control. So it contains a button. So this button is contained inside its own linear layout, and then the very last control here is a scroll view. So the scroll view is there, and it contains one text view. So what our app will do is it will allow a user to enter a name and age, add it to the internal database, and then when you click read, it gets sent to the text view here. So the scroll view is added so that if the info is long, you'll get a scroll bar so you can scroll if anything is off the screen. So it's a simple enough layout. It's also a good technique to keep in mind when you're arranging things in your control. So looking at the two buttons, since I prepared this beforehand from a running application, you'll also see that the buttons already have an on-click assigned to them. The first button, btn insert for inserting data, goes to the function called insert data, and then the second button, btn read, goes to read data. So before we do anything else, we will fix that particular error by creating the function for those two buttons. So the first one is insert data, and then the second one is for read data. Alright, so take note, because we're using view binding, I actually don't need view v here, and I'll explain that later. I'll just go back to my XML, read data. I forgot to save. So let's just save all. And we should be working now. Let me rebuild. So let's wait for Gradle to finish recompiling the whole thing. So to remedy the 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. So because we saw that the controls already, or the buttons already had functions assigned to them, let's create the skeleton for those functions. One for insert data, and then the parameter, import view, or enter to correct that, and then the second one would be read data, and then v, and close parentheses, save this, save. Where is my toolbar? Tool windows, project. Fuck. Okay, I'll just save this then. Save all. So I have my function skeletons, and this should be okay now. So I should be able to see read and insert data. So this should be okay. So we now have our user interface, and we have the skeleton functions for what we need, and just proper practice demands we run this one just to see if everything is okay. So I'll bring up my emulator. So while we're waiting, again, we'll look at view binding, and that's what comes next after this one. Now, view binding isn't new, but when it was first introduced in Android X, you actually had to do some, when it was first introduced with Android X, view binding was easy because you just had to import one library. Now, because it's fully integrated with the current SDK, actually, it's much easier, but people got used to the old way of doing it. Well, they were complaining because they got used to what it was before, which was a single import. Now, it doesn't really demand an import, but you do need to go into the Gradle files and edit a short line of code. So, before we do that, our app is running right now. I can click on the buttons and it doesn't crash the app because we already created the needed skeletons for the functions that make the button work. So we can go back to here, see our items here, and to make use of view binding, we'll go to the first item that you guys will need to modify. So that's done in the Gradle files under build.gradle module. So build.gradle module level, which would be, we have two Gradle files there, project and module. So I'll double click on this one to get that file. So there's a section there called Android that normally defines what the version of Gradle is that's being used for the project, what the app ID is, which is basically the package name. If you're going to do automated tests, there's a default entry for the JUnit runner. And then other items like source compatibility version with Java, target JVM, and a couple of library dependencies like since we're using Kotlin in the project, it says Kotlin there. It makes use of the Android X unified library. Currently, its score is at version 1.5. So all of these are automatically done for us by Gradle. So that's inside, or we should be inside the Android section. And normally, I put this before build types, but you can actually put it anywhere inside Android. So, do be careful when you're adding this line. So I put it before build types and right after default config, so I know that I'm here and I'm not overwriting anything else. If you want to be sure, you can put it here right before the closing curly brace for the Android section. Okay, so for me, I like putting it here. I'm comfortable with this one. And we just add this 3 lines of code. So it's build features, open, close, and then it's 1 line. And we just tell Gradle that we want to make use of view binding. So, was true. And again, before the current updates, I think it was last year where you had to have that single import to a Kotlin library. That's not used anymore. This is how you do it. Under build.gradle, module level, you add this section to the Android portion of the file. So build features, view binding equals true. I'll close this. I'll save all again. So now, we can go back to our, and if it tells you to sync Gradle, you of course say you do have to sync. You shouldn't encounter any problems with it. So I'll go back to my main activity and then change this portion here. So with set content view, this has to be modified if we're going to use view binding. So I'll comment this out. And then setting up screen with view binding. So super on create stays there because it's required. We have to, I have to declare one item first. So these are our imports, and I have to declare one variable here called, wait, before I do that, I need to make the project so it gets recompiled. I need to recompile it because now that we're telling Gradle view binding will be used, all of our XML files for the screens will get an additional compiled file that we don't see here, but it's there. And what that file does is have those controls ready for use programmatically without us using find view by ID. Okay, so some of the work looks like more work when you're already used to find view by ID, but in the long run, especially in more complicated apps, doing it this way helps to lessen your code by probably 5 to 10%. So that's why a lot of developers actually like it. So now, when we recompile, all of the layout files get a secondary Kotlin class. So we'll call this binding that uses this particular naming convention. So my layout is called activity underscore main.xml. Because view binding has been set to true, every time I recompile the project, I now get a file called, and it's a Kotlin class, activity main binding. So it takes this name, turns it into the normal naming convention for a Kotlin class, which is capital letters for every word in the name, no underscores, and then adds the word binding at the end. So this is directly associated to activity underscore main dot xml. So I'll select that to complete this. The import gets added here. Now for the screen, since we're not going to use r.layout.activity main anymore, we need 3 additional lines of code. Since binding is a late init, I now have to tell binding where to get its actual character. So I'm asking it to get it from activity main binding by calling the inflate method of activity main binding. And we're going to get the layout inflator for it. So you'll notice it's already an active variable. It's actually part of activity main binding, layout inflator. And then we have to attach this to a view because we need to show something to the user. So binding root, and then we are required to have set content view, and this will just be view. So instead of this one line, which we normally have, we now get these items. So where does that help? We won't be doing the database code yet for this. That will be done in a separate activity. But what we want to do is to fully realize some of the actions for these buttons. So when I click on add data, what it will do when it's complete is get the values from these edit text boxes and then write them to the local SQLite database. After writing it, it will clear these text boxes so that the user can enter the next set of data. When I click on read, read will get whatever is in the database and then put it inside the text view in this third section of the user interface. So I'll go back to main activity and then I'll go to the insert data code. So notice that I didn't do our usual declaration of variables for the parts of the or the widgets on the screen that we normally do. Because of view binding, I can now do this. So first, I want to check if there are content in the two edit text boxes. So I can just do that directly by doing this. Now, normally, we'd have a variable representing the edit text boxes, but because I have the binding variable on top, I can now use it here. And once I hit that dot, you'll see that the controls inside activity main.xml, the ones that we've named, are here already. So we have btn insert, we have btn read, we have the two edit text boxes, edit text age and edit text name. And then the text view called PV result. So I'll get edit text name. And we can do with this whatever else we did with object variables representing code before. So put a dot there. And then we'll get the text dot to string. And we check it immediately if it's not empty. Then we also, I'll close the Project Explorer again so I have more space for this. We also want the other edit text to have something inside it. So same thing, without the need for a find view by ID, we can directly call to text.toString is not empty. So we'll only process the information if both edit text boxes have items inside them. So at this point, we don't have the database items yet, so I'll just use a simple toast here. So our old friend toast context, we just get application context, and then if you guys were looking carefully, I still type get. That's how it was done before, way before Kotlin happened. So it's still reflexive for me to type get application context when it pops out, of course, the more proper item now, which is application context. So next is our message. So we'll just leave it this for now because we really don't have the database items yet. Long, and then we want to clear those fields. So I'll actually make a function called clear field to clear those. So that will be an error now, and I'll add clear field here. So fun clear field. And because we are using view binding, I can just do this. Binding edit text name dot text dot field. And then binding dot edit text age dot text dot here. And then I should bring back the focus to the name. Set focus as purpose. So again, with object-oriented programming, if you can't remember something but you have some idea what you want to do, the dot is your friend, and IntelliSense will help you find what you need most of the time. And that's why I also like saying you don't memorize stuff, you understand them, because if you know you're using something that's object-oriented, you can always do this. So we have this now, and we'll run this. And before I run this again, we're looking at view binding. We're looking at a way to, or at an option to replace find view by ID, and hopefully code with less lines and more efficiently. So now, I am directly referring to controls without the need to create a separate object variable from them. So doing it at the start seems like extra work, because instead of this one line to set the view to r.layout.activity main, we have these 3 additional lines. But then we get to refer to the controls directly with their actual names instead of creating variables for them. So I'll run this now. For those excited about the database part of this, we will have that in a separate discussion. So this is now our code. I'll enter a name and an age. Take note that this edit text has been limited to numbers only. That's why you get the numeric keypad here. If we go to the code, edit text, input type, number. So for those who aren't familiar with that, the edit text has actually various input types. That's also why in the palette here, when you go to text, you see most of those input types here. And so these are just all edit text with special conditions. Like if I say number, you can only enter number there. If you're designing the app, that is part of the validation part. Okay, so if you're creating your app, that's part of the validation. And you can have it built in to limit user errors. You can just say it's number. So we imagine we're adding data. If we have the database functionality in, when I click read, I should see that here. So we don't have it yet, but at least now we know that it works. Those fields get cleared. Though I did not see the post appear. Oh. Okay. And then the post application. Oh, that is changed. Let me save this. And I'll run it again. Oh, there. Now I see it. So, that's view binding. Hopefully, you all picked up something new, and you picked up something that you can use in your future applications. So, we'll continue this with other sessions that will add the database functionality. Thank you for joining me, and continue your Android journey. Stay safe.